Hi everyone. In our last video we looked at how to find tax incidence in a market graph when we have a market with a tax. So let's do the same thing again, but just for fun, let's put the tax on the sellers this time. So our supply with the tax, remember that always shifts up by the amount of the tax. So before the tax, this was our market quantity, and this is our market price. And after the tax, this is our market quantity, and this is our market price. Or at least, that is the price that is paid by the buyers. How can we tell? Well, because it's on that demand curve there, right? So that represents the price that is paid by the buyers. Okay. And then this point represents what the sellers actually get. That makes sense, right? The price with tax is the tax plus whatever the seller gets to keep, right? So when you buy a McDonald's iced tea and you pay $1.08, McDonald's has to pay that 8 cents or 7 cents, depending on what state you're in. They have to pay that to the government, and they get to keep $1. Okay, so the difference between those is the amount of the tax. It should be the same as the curve shifted up here. So this red box represents tax revenue. And before we broke up things into shapes, so let's just do that again. A, B, C, F, G, and H. Okay, so B represents the buyer's tax burden, and F, once again, represents the seller's tax burden. We know that because B used to be part of consumer surplus, now it's part of tax revenue. F used to be part of producer surplus, now it's part of tax revenue. But that actually brings up an interesting question. How do we calculate total surplus in this market? Okay. Before, when we calculated total surplus, we just added up consumer surplus plus producer surplus. So let's do that here. Total surplus is A for the consumer surplus, that's all they have left. And the producer surplus, the H, that's all they have left. But let's think about this carefully. We don't want to be throwing out surplus that still exists. Right? And we know that this C and G here, right, that doesn't exist anymore. That's deadweight loss. So we definitely don't want to include that. But we do want to include the tax revenue. Okay, so technically, consumer surplus, total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus the tax revenue. And the way to think about that, because this is not welfare that is lost to anyone, it's just being reallocated. Right? So this is welfare that's being reallocated to some government body. And we have to at least assume that, they're not just taking that tax revenue out into a field and burning it. Maybe they're actually doing something useful with it. So when you're calculating total surplus, don't forget to include that tax revenue.